The morning of the wedding was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the sky is holding its breath. I stood in front of the small mirror in the guest room. The shirt I wore was white and new. It didn't belong to me. Madame Veronica had sent a tailor to measure me a week before. The trousers were clean, the shoes shiny, and the scent of the perfume still hung in the air. I looked like a groom. But inside me I felt like a boy pretending to be a man. My hands shook as I buttoned the shirt. My heart was pounding hard in my chest. Not with joy. Not with excitement. With something else. Fear. Not fear of the woman I was marrying. Not even fear of being judged. But fear of the unknown. Fear of what this new life would bring. Fear of waking up tomorrow and realizing I had made a mistake I could never undo. I heard a knock on the door. It was the young woman who worked for Madame Veronica, the same one who had opened the door for me the first day I came. She smiled gently. "She's ready," she said. I nodded slowly and followed her out. The living room had been decorated with simple white cloths and blue ribbons. There were flowers in small glass jars and chairs arranged in neat rows. There were no trumpets, no crowd, no singing, no drummers. Just a small gathering of 4 people. Madame Veronica, her lawyer Mr. Ao, a female judge, and the young woman who now stood beside me. I looked around again. There was no food waiting. No guests in Reby. No dancing. No cake. This was not a celebration. It was a transaction. The judge cleared her throat. "Shall we begin?" Madame Veronica stood calmly. She wore a long green lace dress, with silver earrings and white beads around her wrist. Her face was as calm as always. Her eyes met mine and she gave a slight nod. The judge began to read. It felt strange, listening to someone call out words like marriage and union and commitment, while my mind wandered to my siblings. Were they eating breakfast? Did Saad remember to pack Tope's notebooks? The judge asked the question. "Do you, Veronica Olenike Agbage, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Clear." Certain." Then she turned to me. "And do you, Dimeji Afalabi Adekunal, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" I opened my mouth. The words didn't come at first. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I felt something rise in my throat. Something heavy. A knot of emotions. I thought of my mother. I thought of my father. I thought of all the nights I went to sleep with nothing in my belly and tears in my eyes. Then I said it. "I do." But I didn't smile. The signing followed. I wrote my name slowly, each letter feeling like a nail hammered into a door I was locking behind me. Dimeji Afalabi Adekunal, husband of a woman more than twice my age. When we finished, the judge said, "Congratulations." But no one clapped. Not even me. Madame Veronica walked toward me and handed me a small key. "This is the key to the office downstairs," she said. "It's yours now. You start tomorrow. No special treatment because you're my husband." He nodded. "Thank you." She turned to Mr. Ao. "Take care of the documents." He nodded and left. Just like that, it was done. Later that afternoon I walked home. I didn't take the car Madame Veronica offered. I needed to breathe. I needed the sun. I needed the dust. I needed to feel real. The streets were still the same. Busy, noisy, rough. Children ran barefoot. Traders shouted prices. Katas zoomed past. But when I walked by, people stared. Some pointed. One woman I knew from the next street muttered under her breath, "Shameless boy." Another man said, "So not true. He marry her." Kept walking. Head high. Chest tight. I reached home. The door opened before I knocked. Saad jumped into my arms. "You came back." Tope and Fola followed, hugging my legs. "You smell nice, brother Dimeji," Tope said, laughing. Saad stepped back and looked up at me. "Did the woman say yes?" He nodded. He grinned. "So, is she our new mummy now?" I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "She's something else." That evening I gave them bread, sardines, and a small bottle of malt each. Their joy filled the house like light pouring in through a broken roof. Sod ate slowly, her eyes wide. "Will we eat like this every day now?" I sat beside her and said, "Yes. And more." She touched my hand. "Thank you." Those 2 words made my heart ache. I went outside, sat on the steps and stared at the stars. I was married now. But I didn't feel like a husband. I felt like a servant who had just been invited into a palace, not knowing where to sit, or if he even belonged there. The next morning I wore a shirt and trousers and went to the downstairs office. It was quiet and cool. Computer sat on the table. Files lined the shelves. Madame Veronica entered 5 minutes later. "No husband in this room," she said plainly. "Only a student." "Yes, Ma," I replied. She handed me a thick file. "Today you'll study our staff records and salary structure. After that, you'll sit with our accountant." He nodded. Then she turned to leave but paused at the door. "Thank you for saying yes," she said. I looked up. She didn't wait for my reply. She walked out. That night I wrote in my notebook, "I didn't marry her because I loved her. I married her because I needed to save my siblings. And maybe save myself too." But even though I didn't smile when I said yes, I felt something inside me shift. Something like the beginning of peace. It had been 1 week since I said, "I do." 1 week since I signed the papers and became the husband of Madame Veronica. 1 week since the world began to look at me like I had done something wrong, like I had exchanged my youth for coins and comfort. But no one knew the truth. No one knew how empty I had been, how broken, how close I was to giving up. Still, as the days passed inside that big silent mansion, I began to feel something new. A strange kind of loneliness. Not the one I felt when my parents died. Not the one I felt when my friends laughed at me. This was different. It was the loneliness of being inside a palace that didn't feel like home. The house was huge. 6 bedrooms. 3 sitting rooms. A massive kitchen that smelled of cleaning products and emptiness. Even the light bulbs were silent. The kind of silent that made you feel like even your footsteps were too loud. I had a room, clean, soft bed, a wardrobe, even a small television. But I didn't sleep well. Every night I tossed and turned, wondering if I had made the right decision. Sometimes I heard the ticking of the giant wall clock in the hallway. Like it was reminding me, "You're not supposed to be here." She was kind. But she was also distant. Madame Veronica was not the kind of woman who talked just to talk. If she didn't need to say something, she didn't. In the mornings, she called me to the office for training. We spoke only about business, numbers, staff strategy. When the training ended, she would say, "You may go." No smiles. No warmth. Sometimes I wondered if she even saw me as a person, or just a boy she was preparing to carry her legacy. Ate most meals alone. Lunch was placed on the table by the housemaid. Dinner was usually light. And if I didn't come on time, no one asked. No one waited. No one called. One night I stood by the balcony. The moon was bright, and the town below looked far away. I could see the road where children usually played in the dust, the stalls where women sold bread and oranges. And I missed it. I missed the noise. I missed the smell of roasted corn by the gutter. I missed my old life. Even though it was painful. Because at least, it was real. Here everything was too clean, too cold, too quiet. Even her. Then something strange happened. It was on a Thursday. The bell rang early, around 6:30 in the morning. I was still in bed when I heard the knock on my door. Opened it. It was the housemaid. "Oga Daimeji," Madam said you should meet her in the garden. "Now." She nodded. I dressed quickly and went downstairs. When I got to the garden, she was standing under the almond tree, wearing a long white robe. Her hair was tied back. No makeup. Just her and the wind. She didn't look like a rich woman. She looked a human. "You came," she said. "I did. I couldn't sleep," she said, looking at the sky. The moon was too bright. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me and asked, "Do you miss your old life?" I blinked. She repeated, "Do you miss it?" He nodded. "Yes." Even the hunger. I looked down. Yes. She nodded like she understood. I miss mine too, she said. Before the money. Before the houses. When I used to sleep on a mat in my mother's room and listen to the radio until I slept off. I was surprised. She never talked like this before. She walked to the bench and sat down. I know this house feels empty, she said. Because it is. I sat beside her carefully. She continued. I built all of this to protect myself. But it turned into a cage. We sat in silence. Then she said something I never expected. Tell me about your mother. I told her. I told her how my mother made akara every Saturday morning. How she used to sing while pounding yam. How she never shouted, even when there was no food to give us. How she died with my name on her lips. Madame Veronica didn't interrupt. She listened. Soft. Shoulders low. When I finished, she said, she sounds like a strong woman. She was, I said. She would be proud of you, she added. I looked away quickly. My eyes were wet. That day something changed between us. She wasn't just the rich old woman anymore. She was someone who had also lost something. After that morning she started talking to me more. Not all the time. Not about everything. But small things. She once asked what my favorite food was. I said okra soup with umla. The next day it was on the table. She asked what kind of music I liked. I told her I like songs with deep words. Songs that tell stories. She played one during training. Is this one okay? She asked. Smiled. Yes. But even though she was becoming softer, the house was still the same. Big, quiet, and full of cold memories. One day I passed by a locked room upstairs. The door had dust on it. A small sign hung loosely, Michael. I didn't ask. But the name stayed in my mind. Another night, I went to her office to return a file. She wasn't there. The door was half open. Pushed it gently. Then I saw it. Photo frame on her table. It was her, standing beside a young boy. He looked about 15. His smile was wide. His hand was around her waist. They looked happy. The boy looked nothing like me. But the way she looked at him in the photo, it was different. Loving. I knew immediately. Michael. The boy she adopted. The one who left. She entered the room and saw me staring at the picture. Panic. I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't mean to. It's okay, she said. I stepped back. She walked to the table, picked up the photo, and held it close to her chest. He left 5 years ago, she said. Stole money. Broke into the safe. Took the car. I never saw him again. I said nothing. I don't know if he's alive or dead, she whispered. I'm sorry, I said. She nodded. He called me wicked, cold, controlling. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. 'Cause maybe she had been all those things once. That night I realized something. She wasn't just building a legacy. She was looking for someone who wouldn't leave her. Someone who would stay, even when the walls were high and the rooms were cold. Someone who wouldn't run like Michael. I looked at my reflection in the window. And I made a silent promise. I will not run. Not for hunger. Not for shame. Not even for love. I would stay. Because I knew what it meant to be left behind. And I could never do that to someone else. I had been married for 2 weeks. But no one called me husband. Not even once. Not the guards at the gate. Not the housemaid. Not the staff at the office downstairs. Not even Madame Veronica herself. Every morning, I woke up in the guest room at the back of her mansion, wore my clean shirt, and sat through hours of business training like a student in school. She gave me files, taught me numbers, explained land agreements, showed me tax records. We spoke like business partners, or teacher and student, but never like husband and wife. She never once said, "My husband," and I never called her my wife, not even in my mind. Outside the house, the world had their own names for me. Names that pierced like nails through my skin. Gold digger. Woman rapper. Mummy's pet. Boy husband. I tried to ignore them. I tried to stay focused. But some words don't just hit your ears, they hit your heart. And they stay there, like scars. One morning I was at the local shop buying soap for the house when two women walked in behind me. They didn't know I could hear them. "That's the boy that married the rich madam," one whispered. "Ehen. That small boy. Yes na. He's eating well now. Look how fresh his skin is." I clenched my fist and walked away. But their laughter followed me home. Later that day, Madame Veronica and I had a meeting with her farm manager. We discussed buying new seeds, increasing staff wages, and expanding one of the farms to a new area. She was calm, confident, focused. After the meeting I tried to talk. "Madam," I began. She looked up. Paused. I had never called her anything else. Just Madam. I tried again. "Ma, can I ask something?" She nodded. "Speak." I swallowed hard. "Why don't you call me your husband?" Her face didn't change. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Because that word is too heavy for us right now." And blinked. "Too heavy?" "Yes," she replied. "I gave you food, shelter, future, but not love, not affection, not even companionship." She stood and walked to the window. "Husband is more than a name," she added. "It's a role. And I don't want to lie to either of us." I lowered my head. "But am I not your husband legally?" "Yes," she said. "On paper. But emotionally, spiritually, we are two strangers learning how to walk beside each other." That truth hit me hard, because deep down I already knew it. That night, I went back to the guest room and stared at the ceiling for hours. I asked myself, who am I to her? Who is she to me? I wasn't her lover. I wasn't her son. I wasn't her friend. I was just there, like a shadow standing in the corner of her life. The next day something happened. It was raining hard. I was carrying 2 files from the main house to the office outside when I slipped on the wet tiles and hit my arm. It wasn't serious, but I fell hard. The housemaid rushed to help me. "Olga, are you okay?" I nodded, even though pain shot through my elbow. She looked worried. "Should I call Madam?" I shook my head. "No, please." But it was too late. Madame Veronica came out with an umbrella, her wrapper tied tightly, and worry in her eyes. "What happened?" she asked. I stood quickly. "Nothing. I just slipped." She looked at my arm. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She stared at me. "Why didn't you ask for help?" "I didn't want to disturb you," I said quietly. Her eyes softened. For a moment I thought she might say something comforting. But she just turned away. "Be careful next time," she said. Then she walked back in. That night I sat outside and let the rain fall on my legs. I watched as it poured over the roof, dripping like tears from the sky. And I whispered to the wind, "Why does this feel so hard?" I was no longer hungry. I had money in my pocket. I had clothes, bed, a key to a house most people only dream of. But my heart, it still felt empty. The next morning, Madame Veronica was waiting for me in the study. She handed me a folder. "We're traveling to Ibadan tomorrow. I want you to attend a property auction with me." I was surprised. "Travel?" "Yes. I want you to see how land deals work in person." He nodded. "Thank you." He paused. Then she said, "You've been doing well." I looked at her. "You listen. You ask smart questions. You're learning fast." "Thank you," I said. She added, "And I know this isn't easy." I didn't respond, because if I did I might cry. That evening I told Saad we were traveling. He jumped. "You're flying." "No. We're driving." "Will she buy you things?" Topaz smiled. "I don't know. Tell her we want suya," Saad said. I laughed. "Okay." As I packed a small bag I realized something. This trip wasn't just about business. It was a test. Could I really stand beside her in public? Could I really walk into a big room with her and not feel shame? Could I act like a husband when no one called me one? The next day we left early. The car was quiet. I looked at her. She looked at the road. We didn't speak much. But somewhere in the silence, I felt something beginning. Not love, not joy, but respect. That night in Ibadan, we stayed in separate rooms at the hotel. But before we went in, she said something I would never forget. Don't let the world tell you who you are. Let your actions speak louder than your name. He nodded. And I whispered, "Good night, madam." He paused, then said softly, "Good night, Daimeji." Still not husband. But somehow, it was enough. There are some sounds you never forget. The scream of your mother as she coughs blood into her palm. The silence after your father stops breathing. The rumble of your stomach when there is no food for 2 days. But then, there are other sounds too. The kind that make your chest feel like it might burst from joy. That evening I heard one of those sounds. Laughter. Not mine. Not Madame Veronica's. But my siblings. Oh, Fola. Their laughter rang like music across the small compound we used to call home. For the first time in a very long time they were laughing. And it wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. It was full, real, loud. It was the kind of laughter that came from full bellies, safe hearts, and simple joy. And that moment told me something no words ever could. Maybe I had made the right decision. Earlier that week, after the trip to Ibadan with Madame Veronica, I had returned to the mansion feeling more settled. The land auction had gone well. I stood beside her while she negotiated with old men in agbadas, businesswomen in glasses, and fast-talking agents. She didn't stumble. She didn't beg. She didn't blink. She owned every room we entered. And somehow, she made space for me to stand beside her. Not behind. Beside. She introduced me simply. "This is Daimeji. He works with me. Not husband. Not assistant. But with her." That word stayed with me. The day after we returned, she handed me an envelope with my name on it. Inside was 50,000 Nigerian nairas. I looked up at her, confused. "What's this for?" "Yes. For your family," she replied. "Go and see them. Buy what they need. But be back here by tomorrow evening." I stood there, frozen. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Thank you," I whispered. He turned away. "No need for thanks. Just go." When I got to the small house where my siblings still lived, it was already afternoon. The sun was high, but I didn't feel it. I was too excited. I knocked gently. Sod opened the door. Her face lit up like a lamp. "Brother Daimeji." She threw herself into my arms. Fola ran to my legs. Tope came out wiping his eyes, like he had just woken from sleep. They pulled me inside. The room still looked the same. Cracked walls, uneven floor, a broken plastic chair in the corner. But something was different. Their eyes were brighter. Their voices lighter. Their spirits alive. I opened the bag I brought and began to bring out items one by one. Bags of rice. Spaghetti. Beans. Canned tomatoes. Toothpaste. 3 new school bags. A pair of sandals for Tope. A soft red sweater for Sod. A toy car for Fola. And then, at the bottom of the bag, a small box of meat pies and cold drinks. Their eyes widened like they were dreaming. Sod covered her mouth. Are we rich now?" she asked, half joking. I laughed. "No. But we're better." Tope shouted. "Yes," and jumped up. Fola began dancing on the spot. And then came the laughter. Not the quiet kind. Not the polite kind. The loud, silly, joyful kind that children are born to give the world. I watched them dance and laugh, and I felt something inside me begin to melt. A wall I didn't know I had built came crashing down, and I cried, quietly, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears that said, "You did something right, Daimeji." Later that evening we sat in a circle eating together. I told them I had to go back to the mansion tomorrow, but I would visit often. Sod asked quietly, "Is the woman nice to you now?" He nodded. "She's trying," Tope said. "Do you still sleep alone?" Chuckled. "Yes." Fola climbed on my back. "I want to come and sleep in the big house too. One day," I told him. "Soon." And I meant it. The next morning I walked with them to school. I watched Sod skip in her new sweater, Taupe hold his new sandals proudly, and Fola wave at every bird that flew past. And I smiled. Not fake, not small, full smile. Because I knew something now. Sometimes sacrifice becomes a seed. You bury it in the ground. People step on it, mock it, forget it. But with time, it grows. And when it blooms, it becomes the kind of joy that money can't buy. When I returned to the mansion that evening, Madame Veronica was in the garden. She didn't turn to look at me. She just said, "Did you enjoy the visit?" "Yes," I replied. "Thank you for the money." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Did they laugh?" Pause. "Yes. They laughed a lot." Still facing the flowers, she said quietly, "Good. Children should laugh." I didn't know what to say, so I stood in silence with her. Side by side. Two people who had lost much, but now were learning how to give again. That night I wrote in my journal, "They laughed today. Not because I became a man. Not because I wore a new shirt. Not because I married a rich woman. They laughed because they felt safe. And that is worth everything." The house was silent again. That deep, endless silence that wrapped itself around the walls, making every sound echo like a secret. It had been nearly 1 month since the wedding. 1 month since I became the husband of Madame Veronica. 1 month since I started walking through her mansion like a ghost with a key. Most of our days followed the same rhythm. I woke up in the guest room before dawn, bathed, dressed, and reported to the study at 8 a.m. sharp. She would be there, already waiting, files on the table, a pen in her hand. We'd go through spreadsheets, read about land cases, examine reports from her shops and farms. After that we'd have a quiet lunch. Then silence. Then more work. Then the day would end. And we'd each return to our separate rooms. Two people under the same roof. Living like strangers with purpose. But something changed one night. Something I was not prepared for. It started as a dream. I had fallen asleep early, tired from the long meeting with one of her estate managers. In the dream I saw my mother again. She was standing in the old kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She turned to smile at me, then said, "Listen, Daimeji." That was when I woke up. 'Cause I heard something. A sound I didn't expect in this cold house. It was soft at first, muffled, but it was real. I sat up on the bed. The sound came again. Cry. Low, shaky cry. Not from the guards. Not from the housemaid. Not from outside. It was coming from inside the house. Inside the walls I thought held nothing but silence. I stood up slowly, opened my door, walked down the hallway, bare feet touching the cold tiles. I stopped in front of her room. The cry was louder now. Still soft. Still broken. But no longer hiding. She was crying. Madame Veronica, the woman who owned lands and shops, who silenced men with one look, who walked with power and purpose, was crying. And the sound of it cut through me like a knife. I didn't know what to do. Should I knock? Should I walk away? Should I act like I heard nothing? But something inside me, something small and human, pushed me forward. I raised my hand and knocked once. Silence. Then, "Who is it?" "It's me," I said. "Daimeji." More silence. Then, "What do you want?" "I heard something. I just wanted to be sure you're okay." The door creaked open. She stood there in a nightgown, no makeup, hair loose. Her eyes were red. She looked at me. Not with anger, but with something else. Vulnerability. She didn't speak. She just opened the door wider. And walked back to her bed. Followed slowly. The room was large, neat, cold. She sat at the edge of the bed, facing away from me. For a moment we were both quiet. Then she said, "I had a dream." Waited. She continued, "Michael was here. My adopted son. He was holding my hand. We were laughing. Then suddenly he let go. And walked away. Just like that." I sat down on the chair near the window. She kept her back to me. "I gave him everything," she said. "School, food, a name. But he left. Took money. took my car, left a note that said I was cold and controlling. She wiped her face. I haven't cried in 3 years, she added. But tonight it broke through. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the kindest answer. She turned toward me slowly. And for the first time since we met, I saw her not as a rich woman. Not as my mentor. Not even as my wife. But as a mother who had been abandoned. A woman who built walls to protect herself from breaking again. She whispered, "Do you think I'm cold, Daimeji?" I looked at her. And I told the truth. "I think you're trying not to feel." She closed her eyes. Then she said, "Sit beside me." I stood and walked to the bed. I sat gently. She took a deep breath. "I didn't marry you to fix me," she said. "I married you to fix the gap in my legacy. But I never expected you'd begin to fix the gap in my heart." My chest tightened. She looked at me, her eyes soft. "Thank you for knocking." We sat there for a while. No one moved. No one spoke. Just the sound of the fan spinning above us. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Promise me, Daimeji, that even if you hate me one day, you won't leave without telling me why." I nodded slowly. "I promise." She looked away. "That's more than anyone has ever given me." The next morning everything returned to normal. She was back in the study by 8 a.m., dressed sharp, face calm, voice steady. But something was different now. Something small, unspoken, but present. Shift. She poured me tea that morning without asking. When I handed her a pen, her hand lingered. When we reviewed a file together, she said, "You missed something," then smiled gently. It was a crack in the wall. A seed planted in the cold ground. A sign that something was growing. That evening the housemaid knocked on my door and said, "Madam said you should eat with her tonight." My heart skipped. Dinner. Together. The table was set for 2. Rice, peppered fish, dodo, and soft drinks. She sat first. I joined her. We ate slowly, quietly. Then she looked up. "Tell me about your siblings." Smiled. And I told her everything. Their jokes, their dreams, their fears. Her eyes didn't leave me. She asked questions. She nodded. She even laughed once. Soft and short but real. When dinner ended, I stood. "Good night, madam." She paused. Then whispered, "Good night, Daimeji." That night, I went to bed not as her husband by title, but as something closer. Something unnamed, but real. And as I drifted off to sleep, I heard her voice again in my head, soft like a breeze. "I never expected you'd begin to fix the gap in my heart."